You want to know if the giants were real in the ancient times? Well, let's look now at who was talking about the Nephilim, which were the offspring of Anunnaki and humans, which ended up being giants. Now, it wasn't just the Bible that spoke about them. So native tribes, Native American tribes actually talk about them being 40 to 60 foot tall. Some are actually, they say, 150 to 200 foot tall and could catch whales the way a human would normally catch a fish. So let's have a look, because obviously, you know, are these people, are these native tribes making up these stories? Just look how many there are. I mean, I'm just you know, just going through here. The list goes on. So these are just Native Americans. I'll get to other cultures in a moment. Who else talked about the giants? Well, in the Bible, the word Nephilim means giant in the Hebrew dictionary, according to Zechariah Sitchin. Now, we can look down and see that the word Nephilim is said in a couple of places in Genesis, and it's referring to the Nephilim as giants or fallen ones. Now, the fallen ones were the fathers, as I mentioned many a time before. They were the Anunnaki that shouldn't have had relationships with humans. But who else is talking about the giants in those days? Enoch talks about giants and actually describes them as approximately 450 foot high, which is absolutely huge. Gilgamesh was also classed as one of the giants, and I will cover Gilgamesh as I go along on the different videos about the Anunnaki. England had its share of giants. Now, this is a chalk carving, not the real one. This is obviously a fake picture with something covered up, but it was an absolutely massive chalk carving carved in the hillside, and this is fairly ancient. But there was also talk that Noah's son Ham came to the UK after the flood, and Noah's lineage, obviously, as we know, were Nephilim, because they were sons and daughters of human people and the Anunnaki. Now, here's a picture here that was done back in the 1150 AD, and it says here Merlin being assisted by a giant at Stonehenge. Now, we know Stonehenge is older than 1150, so obviously they're taking some liberties here, but the point is that they mention a giant, and that's not the only giant in the UK that's been mentioned. Giant stories require giant lies. Now, if these are lies, then they're pretty much worldwide, because this giant story is based in Wales at the time of Camelot with King Arthur, and this one's called Yazbabaden. I've probably pronounced that wrong because it's Welsh and I'm terrible at pronunciations. But what I'm trying to show here is that all around the world there is different stories. Now, in the UK, there was a poem called The Ruin, written in the 8th or 9th century, which is obviously going back some time. And again, that talks about giants. Now, the giants are worldwide. Now, if we take the fact that they were probably 100,000 years ago when the Nephilim started to appear because of the Anunnaki having relationships with humans, that's 100,000 years ago. That's a lot of time to move around the planet. They couldn't. Have you heard of the giant Finn McCall? Well, supposedly there was a giant back in ancient times, lived in Ireland near the causeway, and was said to be about 54 foot tall, which is about 16 meters, which is absolutely huge. And he lived on the causeway, or the stories go that he was near the causeway, which are these sort of steps, really weird shaped steps. Now, modern scientists say that it's volcanoes that's done that. But the stories go that he built these so he could cross over to Scotland from Ireland, because from where these are, it's a very short distance to Scotland. And he built them so he could see his giant girlfriend. Now, let's just see if there was any evidence in Scotland of anything giant. Yes, this giant sword, genuine giant sword, was found to be from the 15th century and was found in Scotland. So we're connecting the facts now that there possibly was giants. For those of you that are interested in our true history, and I mean proper history, not what mainstream or even universities teach us, but actual, you know, let's get back down to the nuts and bolts of aliens, ancient aliens, giants, Bigfoot, all that kind of good stuff. I put it together in a way that hopefully you'll eventually understand that yes, maybe mainstream has been lying to us. Now, I've also got a YouTube channel if you don't want to watch them all on TikTok. So there's over 400 videos at the moment, and I also do live chats as well, which I put onto YouTube so you can watch them and find out all about our real true history. So feel free to join us. Go back and watch it from video 1 onwards, because I cover Planet X, which is what NASA calls it, which is another name for Nibiru, a planet that's in our solar system apparently. But watch the videos and you'll make up your own minds. So feel free to join us. Hope to see you soon. Goliath the Giant. Now, we've all heard stories of him and how he got beaten, but supposedly he was between 6 to 10 foot tall. Now, there's no actual records, so this is just a guess, but if he was between 6 to 10 foot tall, that makes him the same height as an Anunnaki, which then makes me think, okay, maybe he wasn't an actual Nephilim giant, you know, which can go 20, 30, 40, 50, 450, as we've heard in some of the other videos, foot tall. So if he was about 10 foot, he could have just been an Anunnaki, and he could have been a soldier or something like that. Now, was he real? Well, they actually back in 2005 found some pottery with the word Goliath on it in the same area, and it dated, give or take, about 70 years from the time of Goliath was there. So certainly the name suggests he was there, or someone with his name. Greek mythology or fact. Now, this is a cyclops called Polymothus, probably pronounced wrong, and he supposedly was the son of Poseidon. Now, we all know who Poseidon actually was, Enki, an Anunnaki, and Thusa, I think her name is. And now that would make sense again, because the giants were offspring of the Anunnaki, so Enki could have had another child and it could have been this. Now, we can see that there's possibly a deformity happening, because nowhere in the other descriptions were the Anunnaki only had one eye. So this stands that, you know, there is deformities going on with them. Now, he was also a cannibal in terms of eating little humans. There's no real height to him. No one's sort of said 100% how tall he was, but apparently he was massive, and he would eat people. Another story of giants, this time in Malta, stroke Gozo. Now, this is called the Temple of Giants, or Giants Temple, and it was supposedly created by a female giant, possibly a cyclops, and the story goes that she pushed up these boulders by her own bare hands while having her baby straddled to her back, which is pretty impressive. Malta having giants isn't so far-fetched when you realise that some of these huge ancient monuments that they've built have stones that are 22 tons. Now, that's pretty impressive for a tiny little island, and they're again made of limestone, which would go back to my theory of levitating. But anyway, Malta's also got the elongated skulls, which I've suggested are Anunnaki, and they're missing the sutra there. So Malta had giants and Anunnaki arrive there, which makes sense. Did giants really exist? Now, we've been talking about giants and the mythology of them, but let's see if there was actually any evidence left behind. Now, there's these giant axes and giant sword and giant footprints. I'll go into footprints later on, but yes, there's many of them out there. And giant swords, and even, wait for it, watch this. And this is in Malta, this one.
The Archaeology Museum holds interesting artifacts from Malta's megalithic sites, including the remains of what looks like the statue of a giant female, and even an oversized cup.
Oversized cup in Malta, which is where I've suggested that was a race of giants, which was spoken about in the last video. So you can see it's all slowly coming together now. Human giant footprints. It's quite amazing what mainstream say they are. They say they're dinosaurs, they say they're a trick of the light, just like the face on Mars. They say that they're natural formations, but what they don't say is that they believe that they're actually genuine footprints from absolutely humongous giants, even though our ancient history suggests that there were giants that were absolutely humongous, as well as the fossils that has been taken by the Smithsonian and never released. So, but when you break down where the majority of these giant footprints come from, it's South Africa. Anyone that's watched these videos I've been doing knows that South Africa is where the humans were that were mining for the gold for the Anunnaki. So if the Anunnaki were there watching over the humans, they would have possibly interbred with them, created the Nephilim, the giants, and that's why when you see South Africa you see a lot of giant footprints, which makes sense. I just want to ask you guys, if, forgive the picture by the way, the reason why I'm putting pictures here is because it turns out pictures of or women on the TikToks seem to get millions of views, and unfortunately mine only gets a couple of hundred. So I was just going to ask, how far do you want me to go into our true history? I mean, do you want me to go into you know, Hercules, who Hercules was, the Odyssey, you know, that kind of depth into mythology, which obviously is based on facts? So if you could let me know how deep, or are you just happy for me to sort of skim past that side of it and go on to the next topic, as opposed to continuing on from the Anunnaki to Romans and Greeks, etc. If you could just let me know. This was Gal Gadot, by the way, not me. Wow, look at that giant skeleton compared to that person. But you're smart enough to realise, I hope, that just like crop circles, where the secret people such as the MI5 deliberately paid people to debunk and go out and make fake crop circles, this same thing happened here with a website where they asked people to create fake photoshopped versions of giant skeletons to muddy the water, so that when anyone looks for it they'll say, oh well, it was an internet contest, and therefore every giant is a hoax. But you're smarter than that. So let's just have a look now. These are genuine articles from before internet was around, 1900s and 1800s, talking about giants, more giants there. Now this one's interesting because I mentioned native Indians in a previous video about giants, and of course there's some there. These ones, giants of this size were not uncommon back in ancient times. In fact, if you see where the knee is and the height of the person there, the saying cut them down to size is actually derived from that, when you would cut the person's the giant's knees to try and bring them down to your size as opposed to them being that size. But there's a site here called medium.com, and it goes through a list of different proven locations of giants and how tall they were. 7 foot is obviously tall, but we're not talking giants. But when you scroll down and you see other ones that 24 to 27 foot tall, that's the footprint there. But there's other ones as well if you keep going down. So you know, you have to sort of use a bit of logic here and say, okay, well, if these are genuine, which they were genuine reports back then of these massive giants, there's one there's 11 foot. Don't mess with the redheads. Now, this isn't a Scottish redhead. This is actually a giant killing or trying to kill a military person. Now, this is just obviously a drawing, but the story goes I've heard 2 eyewitnesses who worked for the military talk about this incident in fairly recently in Kandahar, I think it's called, in Afghanistan. In a cave, they came across this giant, and he had a spear. And obviously our military people shot him because that's what they do, and they flew the body away in a helicopter, or underneath a helicopter should I say, and they probably are now using that body to try and create super soldiers. But the redhead's not uncommon in the giant stories. A lot of them are redheads, and they even have double rows of teeth, and possibly sometimes some of the giants had 6 fingers. So you add all this together with the possibility of deformed cyclops. is this an ancient human giant, or is this a mastodon or some other creature? Scientists can't actually agree, but it was found in 1845 and it's got some sort of deformities to it. So going along with the ancient giants that I was talking about of the Bible, etc. And yes, don't quote me on the Bible, because we know the Bible's a copy of the original texts back in the day. So let me know, I'm doing a poll here, let me know if you think giants actually existed in ancient times or not. Oh my, is that another reptilian alien? No, it's just a 7'7" skeleton of Charles Byron, I think his name was, 200 years ago. No, the picture wasn't taken 200 years ago. But the Queen there is visiting him. Now, people say there's no such things as giants in the past. Well, technically, anyone over 7 foot is classed as a giant. So you've got this guy here. No, that's not me. This guy here is 7'9", so obviously he's a giant. So there's loads of giants walking around on Earth at the moment. So next time you say there's no such thing as giants, technically they're living right now. So why can't they have lived in the past? Let's end the myth that giants built the pyramids, unless you believe ancient giants were over a mile tall. And the reason why that would be the case is some of the bricks in the Great Pyramid are 80 tons. So you would need, modern days, a crane that is 600 ton to be able to actually lift that, just one block. The world's strongest man at one deadlift is 500 kilograms. That was Eddie Hall. 500 kilograms is half a ton. Remember, I just said the heaviest blocks in the Great Pyramid was 80 tons. That's 79.5 more tons that someone would have to carry. So if you doubled Eddie's height, and I mean, he literally could just lift it, he couldn't actually move it and put it on somewhere. But let's just double his height, let's just say 10 foot, that would be 1 ton. So you would need a absolute giant of a mile high. You think you're so smart, where's the evidence of the Anunnaki or giants or any of their technology? Well, have a watch of this.
Flowers would travel up and along abandoned towers.
Just 30 years.
After 30 years, the satellites we sent up to explore would fall back down to Earth with no one to collect their data.
So I'm showing here what happens if humans left the Earth, just like the Anunnaki left the Earth.
Drastically. By year 60, marine life would have nearly recovered from decades of overfishing and would
230 years after humans would leave the Earth.
Huge forests will have reclaimed the eastern half of North America, and the only evidence we ever existed would be leftover steel and plastics. Once glorious landmarks would slowly succumb to decay.
So you can see that the Anunnaki stuff would have disappeared unless they had plastic.
The natural world would have succeeded in erasing most of the final traces of human existence. Of course, even after 25,000 years, some of our
Who's got the hump with my videos? Well, these mounds are all over the United States, and supposedly this is where giant skeletons were found by passers-by or landowners, etc. And they would dig them up and find giant skeletons. Now, we can conclude that this is correct because back in 1982, archaeologists have found these mounds, and in the same year, 1882, remember, the Smithsonian actually went along and uncovered 50 mounds which found giant skeletons of 7'6" or taller. Now, this supposedly has now been debunked by Olivia Jones, as you see here. She's called it a myth. So when you look at Olivia Jones, PhD, University of Virginia, West Virginia, guess who? Rockefeller. Yeah, there we go. So we know that anything to do with Rockefeller isn't debunked. The Dead Sea Scrolls talk about giants. In fact, the Dead Sea Scrolls are ancient Jewish and Hebrew writings on these parchments that were found in a cave. Now, the Book of Giants isn't really a Book of Giants. It literally is these parchments that people have created to call the Book of Giants, just like they did with the Book of Enoch. And so you've got the Book of Enoch there, where people converted it into a sort of a modern day looking book. But the Dead Sea Scrolls actually go through, or the Book of Giants, if you want to call it that, talk about how big giants were and things like that. So we've got another ancient record, not just of the skeletons, but actually of someone talking about these giants. Now you got to remember, only a handful of people could write back then, so for them to make up these fictitious stories would have been really crazy. When you add the actual correct translations of words in the Bible totally changes from what you believe it was. So let's have a look here. There's a website here that can actually go from English to Aramaic, which is fine, that's great, but let's have a look at just some of the words that were wrong in the Bible that obviously back then they didn't know the other words for it. So heaven should be the word space. So when next time they say they looked up in heaven, it was space. Angel is really a guard, a physical being, a guard or a policeman type thing. It's an Anunnaki real person, but it's a military of some sort. Holy angel is just a superior version, so in other words a superior guard. Archangel is a commander or a captain, again still Anunnaki. Firmament is the word atmosphere, not a dome, not a solid thing. Elohim is actually the Anunnaki's real race. Jesus, I have now done so much more research. I think I can tell you who he is, where he come from, how he can do these miracles. Now, if you've watched my other videos, you know that I'm not the normal person that will say he's the son of you-know-who. I will tell you where I believe he's genuinely from and how he can do these things. Now, as you know, I do these videos in sort of a chronological order, and I'm still on the Anunnaki at the moment. Once I get past them, it will be Babylonians, etc., Egyptians, and then eventually I will get to Jesus. So subscribe, follow, whatever you need to do if you want to find out what my now thoughts are on who this man is. I've often been asked, if the Anunnaki are so smart, why did they use stone to write stuff down? Well, that's because stone doesn't degrade like everything else that we use. So actually they are smarter than us, because we use pen and a piece of paper. And how long does... Look at your receipts, put that in your wallet, and 5 months later you can't see what you actually bought. Now there's a website here that shows how long it takes things to biodegrade. Obviously out in the elements. So if you scroll down here, wool socks, for example, 1 to 5 years. Plastic coated milk cartons, 5 years. Leather shoes, 25 to 40 years. So the only things that will last a long time is glass bottles, styrofoam, and plastic bags. Now the Anunnaki's we've not found anything that the Anunnaki's used of any of them. So that's why they used stone, because stone... I think you should be able to see ghosts and spirits, but we can't, because we've been suppressed by, unfortunately, our governments. Now, the Book of Enoch talks about spirits a lot, as you can see, but one particular passage here, it says, and I'm just using one, they see him a lot, I saw the spirit of a dead man. Now, children... can actually recall past life regressions as well, but as they get older, something happens to them, something that causes their memories to go. Could it be fluoride, for example, that's stopping us seeing spirits and causing us to forget our past lives? Because they do. Fluoride that's in our water, given to us free of charge, thank you very much. Don't ask where the fluoride comes from, it's disgusting. So are they dumbing us down? Here, look, some people believe that hinders the neurodevelopment in children, and that's fluoride, and that's just one of the things that they put into our... We need to know where the humans moved to when they were created. So this is Adam and Eve, but this is the Adam and Eve that was created by the Anunnaki. It's not the Adam and Eve that Enki had as children, which was around this sort of area. Now this was Africa, which is fine. So the African people, which were the ones created first 300,000 years ago, you can see there's different on this particular map. Now this particular map doesn't take into account that the Anunnaki were around. This is saying that 300,000 years ago the very primitive man made these massive boats that could then take them across the oceans and all different places. Yeah, that didn't happen. So what actually happened was, obviously, the Anunnaki was taking these people, humans, from one place to another. So it starts off here, which is the indigenous Homo sapiens created by the Anunnaki. And this is where logic shows mainstream's a bit silly. So they're saying that 65,000 years ago, the Homo sapiens that were created by the Anunnaki then left there, travelled across the ocean here. Look at that. Oh my God. All the way across, all the way up here to here. Instead of saying that the Anunnaki took them there in their ships, spaceships, they actually said that they crossed there at 65,000 years ago. Now, hunter-gatherers, 12,000 years ago. So they're saying that at 65,000 years ago, which were way before hunter-gatherers, they managed to get on boats and build boats and stuff. So this is this is why what I'm saying, unfortunately, seems to be correct as opposed to listening to mainstream. So you've now got two lots of humans interbreeding where they was crossing over into Mesopotamia from Africa. Now this map here shows the timescales of where people moved around the planet, and that's fine, except you just have to disregard them travelling across the oceans like that. Now there's two types of people that we're talking about at the moment. There is the Anunnakis created the human hybrids, which were in Africa. Then you've got the Anunnaki that had relationships with those and created their offspring. So now you've got two offsprings. Now when the Anunnaki moved people around, both of those other two ended up breeding with each other. So now you've got technically three different races. Now the ones that there were slaves that the Anunnaki had created pretty much were slaves and ended up being slaves all around the places that they needed to take them to. The ones that, for want of a better word, that were smarter, only possibly because the Anunnaki decided to teach them, because they were the offspring of the Anunnaki. The offspring of the Anunnaki were more European, shall we say, and that's where they ended up staying, which is why you have Mesopotamia, so it's sort of like the Middle East area. Then you've got their offspring between them and the people that was in the Abzu, and they travelled further because they weren't sought after by the Anunnaki. In other words, the Anunnaki kind of looked after their own offspring from humans and the ones that they'd created 300,000 years ago. But their offspring, between the two human types, they ended up travelling off, which is, we can see that in not only these maps, but we can actually see that in different skeletons where we've got different types of European people back then, which gives the reason why this map's got a different coloured chart. So this all makes more sense than people travelling on boats around the world. Now this is where it starts getting a bit tricky. So the people from India, I personally think that they were offspring of the Anunnaki's offspring and the humans that were created 300,000 years ago. So now you've got a different type of human on this planet, an extra one. And then those type also then bred back with the offspring of the Anunnaki, and so on. And this is how we ended up with this diverse population. Now mainstream actually say that the people from India actually migrated from Africa, which would make sense along with my lines there, that all these now different types of breeding went on and they ended up settling in that sort of area there. Now the mainstream tells you where Chinese people come from, and I'll talk about that in the next video. We need to look at where all the different types of humans come from. So the first human was, and we'll call them A, and that was created by the DNA of the Anunnaki and Neanderthals to make number A. B, which is the second lot of humans, were the Anunnaki having relationships with A, which created B. A third humans, we'll call C, was actually now A and B having relationships together to create C. And fourth was D, which was A, which was the first humans again, and Neanderthals and other types of hominids at the time. So as you can see now we're getting different colour skins, etc. So then there's Neanderthals and the Denisovans, I probably pronounced wrong, which created the unknown humans, which mainstream admit that there is humans that was unknown. So then you've got F, which is unknown plus A, and then you've got unknown plus B, unknown Where did the Chinese people come from? Now, there's a theory that they came from Mars. They were indigenous to Mars, and they left Mars when Mars was having attacks by whoever it was that was attacking them. But I kind of go along more with the mainstream, which say that after studies, 97.4% of the genetic makeup is from the ancestral modern humans. That's the people I was talking about that would have been the slaves in the Abzu. So watch my other videos if you have no idea what I'm on about. Plus, so modern humans, plus they're also mixed with Neanderthals and I can't pronounce that. But so watch my last video. It explains how they all are mixed together, which creates all these different races that we've got. Some of my videos are now being pulled off of TikTok before they've even been released, so go to YouTube, subscribe, they'll be on. To prove my theory is correct that the indigenous species breeded with the humans or Homo sapiens sapiens and then so on and so on, they all mix together like I said in the last video. Please watch that if you don't know what I'm talking about. You'll see here that mainstream are still finding in different locations, this one's Israel, another skull for a different type of Homo sapien that obviously came and went, which would make sense. Another one here that they found, and another one here they call him Dragon Man, found. I think this one's China. But just to prove it, now this is Harvard University's own paper here, so they're saying Homo erectus, but it could have been Neanderthal with the missing link, so that's obviously the Anunnaki. But look, they admit there's inbreeding between different species, and this is exactly what I was just saying in the last video, so I kind of feel like I'm correct. Why are there redheads more in Scotland than most other places? Now that actually makes sense, because in Scotland we've mentioned already that giants around the world were more redhead than they were any other colour. Now here's a book talking about the folklore of giants in Scotland. And there was actually quite a lot of giants supposedly in Scotland. Now, if you take into account that when the Anunnaki had relationships with the Homo sapiens sapiens and they created the Nephilim, not all were Nephilim. Not all of them were absolutely huge. Some of them were, 6-7 foot. And eventually those made their way around the world, which is why we've got different places with different colours. But predominantly a lot of them actually settled into Scotland. Now, if you look at mainstream, they actually also say the same thing. They say that redheads come from the Middle East. And as we know, the Middle East is where the Anunnaki. So how many humans are there if there was inbreeding between Neanderthals and humans and Nephilim and everything else? Right, so we know there's a missing link and we know why. Now here it says there's only one species of human. However, I disagree. I think there's about 10 on the planet at this one time. And that 10 includes blacks, whites, Polynesians, Chinese, Indians, etc. So although we're one species, we're diverse species, so I'd say there's 10. And here it says that there was inbreeding between the Neanderthals and the other species that was here at the time, which is what I'm saying. So how many in total are there? Well, the Smithsonian, which we know lie, there's 21 they suggest, so, and that's without finding all the skeletons, etc. So I'm saying there was probably 30 at one point, if not more. I hope you don't believe mainstream media when they tell you how old things are. So that's a pyramid, that's a ziggurat. Ziggurats are way older than pyramids. We're talking hundreds of thousands of years older, yet mainstream say that these were built around 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, not too far off of when they were built. But let's have a look on why mainstream's wrong. So here's mainstream talking about the Great Flood 2,350 years ago. That's the Great Flood, says this website here. Evidence, ABC News says 5,000 years. Smithsonian says 7,500. That's the difference between that one and that one of 5,000 years. So you can clearly see they haven't got a clue. This website is probably more accurate. It says 5,770. They did some good calculations, which is the way I actually did it based on the literature. So don't believe This Christmas, don't let your freezer overfill and end up leaving the door open accidentally and the food going to waste. Go to fridgedoor-alarm.com or visit them on eBay to buy a fridge door alarm to fit to your fridge door. Don't hate me if you went to university to study history and you've now worked out that it's a complete waste of time. So this is a stepped pyramid called a ziggurat, which is one of the oldest buildings in the world ever, and mainstream kind of dates it to 2100 BC, which means it would have been in the flood, because the flood was either 2000 to 7000 years ago. So let's see what other people say. So Eric von Danahan, who is on the same page as me, he suggests the same thing. He suggests that they were in the flood. But because the normal Giza pyramids, everyone knows that they're older, the ziggurats are well older than the Great Pyramids in Giza. But how come mainstream here is saying they weren't flooded? But yet if the ziggurats were flooded, these would have been flooded. So you see why I'm saying university have taught you. No, these are not spaceships, these are different types of pyramids. Now, ignore the dates here. As I've proven in the last two videos, mainstream haven't got a clue. And if they do have a clue, they're hiding the actual real dates from us. Now, obviously, they hid the real dates from us, which, if you believe my videos and the literature, which was the ancient text that tells us that they built these, the Anunnaki built these when they came here, then these are hundreds of thousands of years old. Now obviously if mainstream allowed us to know that, then obviously once we know that these are hundreds of thousands of years old, that then means the Anunnaki were real, and then aliens are real, and it's a whole new world, and God isn't what we all think he is. So just bear that in mind when you're looking at these descriptions and dates when on mainstreams. They are wrong by hundreds of thousands of years. So as we move along with the Anunnaki story to about from 100,000 years ago to about 30,000 years ago, we see that the Neanderthals were wiped out. Now that could have been because they weren't very smart, or humans or Homo sapiens sapiens could have wiped them out, but most of the hominids around had gone by then, so it's just left the Homo sapiens sapiens. And as I mentioned in a previous video, I think there's about 10 species of Homo sapiens sapiens now scattered around the world, and that would have been around 30,000 years ago. Now the Anunnaki at 30,000 years ago were still having relationships with the Homo sapiens sapiens, creating the Nephilim, or Watchers, whatever you want to call them. Now that's where the problem started, because so many of these now were giants and were causing problems and eating people, and the king Anu didn't like it. OMG, don't listen to mainstream science. Maybe actually start watching my videos and you'll realise that I seem to know a little bit more than mainstream. So mainstream say that this is a big lump of iron that's in the centre of our planet, and I suggested that it's actually possibly ice, or at least water, and the reasons for that I go into on my videos, and it actually makes a lot more sense than it being iron or a lump of iron. However, now scientists have come out with, they're saying they think the center of the earth has semi-soft characteristics. Semi-soft. Now they're saying where liquid metal is stored. Now semi-soft characteristics of liquid, so forget the metal, because that's obviously them again thinking that they know everything and thinking that they know it's metal, but they also were the ones that thought it was a big solid rock lump of iron, but now they're saying it's liquid. So maybe I am right and it is water, and if you watch my previous videos I explain why it's probably water. The molten core or ice. I did a video, the last video, talking about this, but I've just found another site here that's actually saying, from University of Hawaii, is saying that it is liquid materials. Now the last video I done was showing another site where they said it was possibly liquid metals, but obviously no one knows because no one's actually gone there. But Hawaii is actually admitting now that it could just be liquid materials as opposed to metals, and therefore the ice idea, see video number 37 I think it is of mine if you're interested in how the center would be ice, and makes actually more sense than metal, believe it or not. Once again, I'm using these websites which have universities behind them to say that I'm kind of more right than wrong. History in the making. You're watching this live here now. This is a skull recently found in a cave in South Africa. Anyone that's watched these videos knows the importance of South Africa and how the Anunnaki created Adam and Eve. Now this is special because it's from a hominid called Homo naledi, which is yet another species that was around, recently found, that was around the time of the Anunnaki. So now we've got at least 4 or 5 species that the Anunnaki could have been manipulating their DNA to create the modern man, Homo sapiens sapien. And what's amazing about this is, as you see here, is there, even this website saying something amazing was going on in this cave 200 to 300,000 years ago. What was that amazing stuff? I'll tell you in the next video. What makes this Homo naledi child skull so important to me is how mainstream are so thick, and I say that with the utmost sincerity. So this skull was found in a cave. It was such a tight spot in this cave in South Africa. 300,000 years ago it was there, and even the cave people had trouble trying to get through. That's why they've called it the Superman Crawl. Now the why I say mainstream's thick is they're saying, oh, it was probably a death ritual, that this child's skull was in a particular place that you couldn't really get to. And this is 300,000 years ago. Hunter-gatherers were around 11 to 12,000 years ago. Hunter-gatherers, that was just about working out how to team up and do stuff. So they're saying 300,000 years ago, literally, primates were thinking of death rituals. Come on, join with me and say how thick they are. RH negative blood type. Now we're here to find out where it actually come from. Mainstream do not know. That is actually a fact. If you Google it, they'll come up with theories, but you'll see they're all different and they really don't know when. They can kind of guess that it was tens of thousands of years ago. What is tens of thousands of years ago? Anywhere from 50,000 to 100,000 years. Now you can guess where we're going with this. So let's have a look at who these people are now that has a majority of it. So there's a place called Basque in between France and Spain. Now they have the most population of people at 35%, I think it is, that has RH negative. So that's important as we continue through these videos to find out who and where it come from. RH negative. Now this is what the Basque people look like. They're European, and no, this is not him from the BFG giant. However, I might be giving a bit of a clue away here. And keep watching. Giants and RH negative blood type. Hold that thought. Let's go back to the Basque people who live in between France and Spain. What's interesting about them is they actually got their own language. Now why in the middle of 2 countries would they have their own language? It's quite unique. Now let's have a look at what the NHS says about rhesus negative. They say it's a disease. Now a disease means it's a foreign body. It shouldn't be there. So let's see what the Bible says about. So this is a website, I won't even try and pronounce that, called that, and they're saying that the Bible says that RH negatives from angels, and we know angels are Anunnaki, so there we go, fallen angels, as I've mentioned many times before, interbreeding with human women, creating the giants known as the Nephilims. So let's have a look now. There's where they would have bred, and that's Mesopotamia. There's a landmass there, quite easily could have got to Spain. Now that means Spain would have had to have possibly some redheads, and it turns out redheads is not uncommon, it's common in many regions. Are you RH negative, rhesus negative blood type? If you are, then you are a descendant of the Anunnaki and humans. So the humans were created by the Anunnaki, which were an alien race, and then the alien race had relationships with the humans that they created, which resulted in the Nephilim. Now we know the Nephilim as giants, but they weren't all giants. Some of them were 5, 6, 7 foot, so it's not inconceivable to imagine that these actual Nephilim carried on living after the flood. So the flood was actually brought on by the will of the gods, which there's ancient texts which we now call the Book of Giants, but there's ancient texts that actually talk about giants, but we converted it into a book. But basically it says, as we all know, the story goes, God was happy, which we know God's the Anunnaki, to allow the flood to happen to get rid of the giants. So that happened. So the Anunnaki allowed the flood, and after the flood, giants still existed, but obviously they'd done a runner. They didn't want to stay around, so they split and they went off to different places as far away as they could. You know, some went to Scotland, Ireland, others went to hidden caves in Afghanistan and things like that. But the smaller Nephilim blended in with the humans that were around. So the humans were anywhere between 4 and 5.5, possibly 6 if you're lucky, foot tall. And so the smaller Nephilim blended in. Now that's interesting, because that then means those Nephilim had relationships with Nephilim, and Nephilim had relationships with Nephilim, you know, the smaller ones, and there you are if you're rhesus negative. Now the other people that have different blood types are obviously between the humans. So there's one blood type there. Then you've got the humans that had relationships with the Neanderthals. There's a different blood type there, and so on. So hopefully that concludes why we have rhesus negative that shouldn't really be here. It's not a natural blood type. It's classed as a disease. It kills babies. So the only way, the logic behind that would be that it's an alien blood type, and that makes complete sense as to why. So yes, you are a direct descendant of the Anunnaki. However, the humans that are here, the other people that are not, were genetically altered by the Anunnaki to create humans. So technically they're part alien as well, with some of the Anunnaki's DNA, but not sort of proper relationship, but just parts of their DNA. So technically all of us Homo sapiens sapiens are part alien, but please get down and worship the rhesus negative people, because they are more alien than us. I just have to address this person here to end the point that people might say there's no such thing as the Anunnaki. Okay, so these stone tablets, carved in walls, carved on tablets, this is the Sumerian cuneiform, but they talk about the Anunnaki and they talk about what they did. So there's no, you know, if you wanted to fake that, you would need to create a whole new language. Now there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of these tablets, so scattered all over Mesopotamia. So if someone was to fake that, they would have had to have gone round, learnt a new language, dug all these out. This is before the internet. Hope that someone would find them, hope that someone would translate them. Yeah. So that's they're real. Okay, there's no denying that. Now the first language ever was the Sumerian language, this one we're looking at here, and it just suddenly appeared. There was no transition from another language. This is the language that suddenly appeared, and it was a full language. It wasn't broken language, you know, like a bit of drawings, a bit of this, a bit of that. It's a fully complete language, and the only way you can get a fully complete language if whoever wrote that language knew it already. So that means it's probably the Anunnaki from another planet who had their own language and came to Earth. So that makes sense. Now, going to the statues that talk about the Anunnaki, as you can see, there's hundreds of these carvings and statues. Now, if someone wanted to fake these, they would have had to fake them a long time ago, at least 500 years ago, to give us the impression. There's a thing called patina as well, which is obviously dates things as much as they can. I don't know if you know what that means, but basically these are old, very, very old. And if someone was going around to fake all these carvings of these people in giant positions, I know people will say, oh, well, that's just a figure of speech. But then if it's a figure of speech, then why were there giant skeletons found? Why was the Smithsonian hiding them? So you see, there's enough evidence to point to that there was a race that knew a language prior to us, that was here before us, because the writing was actually written before humans were on the planet. It was humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, were only here 300,000 years ago, thanks to the Anunnaki, which talk about it. They actually, in that text, talk about how they got here and everything, and then it marries up with the architecture and the buildings and everything else that they've done. So how could someone, it would have to take thousands of people to pull off a stunt to make us all believe that someone wrote all this and hoped that we all learned the language and translated it. It's just impossible for this to have been faked. You just don't go through and carve these things if it's fake. So hopefully that clears that up. I need to briefly mention the Archons, and I say briefly because there's not too much to know about them really. Supposedly they're the creators of the physical universe. Now if they're the creators of the physical universe, that means they are the god, as opposed to the Anunnaki, who were just our gods. Now the descriptions of these characters, Archons, is that they're actually evil, and they feed off of very negative experiences, and they have also been referred to as the jinn, as demons, or as serpents. So you probably find them in Bill Gates' house right now having a cup of tea with him. The Archons, in my opinion, I just don't think there's enough to go on to say that these created the physical universe. The writings obviously came after the Anunnaki were here, so is it possible that just some of them were Anunnakis? I don't know. If Homo sapiens sapiens eventually killed off Neanderthals and the other hominids, I thought we'd just have a quick look at what animals were around at the time that the Anunnaki and the humans were now around Europe. So here's a website here. I know it's Wikipedia, but it gives a list of the creatures and when they died. Now when you see 3000 BC, please remember that that's before Christ. So Christ was 2000 years from where we are now. So that makes it 5,000 years ago, or 3000 BC. So I'm just pointing that out. So there's a long list here of animals that would have been food over the thousands of years ago when the Anunnaki and humans were here. So it would have made sense that we were probably killing off at that point in vast droves all different types of creatures that unfortunately met humans. So it's an interesting thing. It's not just that, it's fish. This is a stone structure, a round stone structure in Israel. I won't try and pronounce it. And basically mainstream found some pottery, so they think that they can date it but different dates. So basically they haven't got a clue really, because just because there was a bit of pottery there, it doesn't mean, I mean, I could go to Stonehenge and drop a cup, it doesn't mean it was built yesterday. So let's just have a look at this stone, and that's because the Anunnaki were using these for their power sources. So and it comes from the ley lines under the ground. So look at that, obviously it's worn down terribly, but this is just someone doing an experiment with sound, which would be the frequency that the Earth would be using. Now different frequencies produce different patterns, as you can see here. When the device is turned on, it creates a different pattern each time at a different frequency, and that's exactly what the ley lines do to help create the power. So to keep the Anunnaki powered up, they created these stone circles. Now it's possible that actually they got little humans to move the stones around, these tiny stones. But look at this. This was the one in Israel. Look at that. Just study that for a second. And now here's one in South Africa. You see, you see the similarity there. So if you watch my last video, you'll see the significance of these stone circles. Now Michael Tellinger has suggested that all ancient, or a lot of the ancient stone structures are actually designed in such a way that it creates a circuit board, and then it can feed power off of a sort of a grid. So in other words, the energy coming up from the Earth creates a power conduit grid that they could then channel the energy off using actually rows of stones. 500 videos. Thank you to everyone that stuck with me from the beginning. You know who you are, wink and point at me. And all those that's just joined, I hope you go back and watch from video 1 onwards. You might hopefully enjoy them. And for those people that have watched my videos, we've now got a competition thanks to the author of this book. Now I mentioned this book early on in my videos because I have a copy of it, as well as other books, but the author found out and sent me a message, and cut a long story short, he's given me 10 copies of this book, which is worth $7.99, to give away in a competition. And he's also recently released this book, which you'd also sent me a copy of, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Really clever. It's to do with the sort of stuff that I talk about, so that's fantastic. So we've got 20 copies, 10 of this and 10 of that, and I'm doing a competition to give them away. The author's paying for the postage, so it can be worldwide, so no problems there. So all you have to do to enter this competition is answer 2 questions. Hopefully they're not too difficult. For those of you that's watched my videos, you'll probably know these. That's the whole point. I don't really want non-followers to sort of win the books, because it's unfair on the people that stuck with me and listened to me all this time. So question 1, what was the race name that I believe is the Anunnakis? So I've mentioned it quite a few times in my videos, I believe, and so does Zachariah Sitchin. I gave you a little clue there. And okay, the second question is, who first told the world about element 115? Now you can find that on the internet quite easily. So if you just put the your answers in the comments, I will then pick at random 10 winners for each book, and they will be sent off to you, and I wish you the best. And just once again, I am continuing doing these videos for you guys, so although there's only 500, there'll be thousands more, and we'll be going into some great detail in the coming videos of all sorts of things that I've not actually covered before in any of the other videos. I was just going through some of my old notes, and I thought, oh my god, I haven't mentioned that, and I haven't mentioned that. You know, even things like the Nazca Peru lines, I've not even covered. So keep watching, but please feel free to enter this if you know the answers, and keep up the good work, everyone. You're all fantastic, and don't forget to watch my videos if you haven't already. I know I'm waffling, but on YouTube, for those of you may have just joined, feel free to go back and watch them. They're in bulk orders, so you can get them in sort of 1 to 50, for example, and 401 to 450, so you can watch them in blocks instead of scrolling on TikTok. So thank you once again, and good luck to those that enter.